The rushing waters of the Colorado River crashed against the rocks as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and crimson. Olivia Simmons held her breath as the current pulled her under for the third time, her lungs burning with the desperate need for air. She had never imagined her journey west would end like this, not after surviving the arduous trail from Boston, not after all she had endured to start a new life. Daniel Evans spotted the woman's pale arms flailing against the water's violent grip from atop his chestnut mare. Without hesitation, he kicked his feet free from the stirrups and leapt from his horse, diving into the churning waters with his boots, denim trousers, cotton shirt, and even his weathered leather vest still on his body. The current was stronger than he'd anticipated, threatening to drag them both downstream toward the rapids that had claimed so many lives. Daniel's muscles strained as he fought against nature's fury, his strong arms finally catching the woman's waist just as she began to sink beneath the surface again. "I've got you," he shouted over the river's roar, though he doubted she could hear him. Her body was limp in his grasp as he turned onto his back, pulling her across his chest and kicking with all his might toward the shoreline. The rocky riverbank tore at his hands as he dragged them both from the water's clutches. Only when they were safely on dry land did he realize just how close they'd come to being swept away forever. The woman lay motionless beside him, her dark hair plastered to her pale face, her lips tinged with blue. "Miss, can you hear me?" Daniel pressed his ear to her chest, relieved to hear a faint heartbeat. Without wasting another moment, he turned her onto her side and patted her back firmly. Water spilled from her mouth as she coughed violently, gasping for air. Olivia's eyes flew open, terror still gripping her as she struggled to understand what had happened. A stranger's face hovered above her, a man with intense blue eyes and a strong, worried expression framed by dripping, wet brown hair. "Easy now," he said, his voice deep and soothing. "You're safe." The current," she managed between coughs. "It was so strong." "River's treacherous this time of year with the spring melt," he replied, helping her to sit up slowly. "What were you doing in there anyway?" Olivia's hand went instinctively to her throat, searching for the locket that was no longer there. "My horse was spooked by a rattlesnake. He threw me into the water. My locket, it was all I had left of my mother." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, mingling with the river water still dripping from her hair. Daniel glanced back at the rushing water, knowing full well her keepsake was long gone. "I'm sorry about your locket, but you're lucky to be alive, miss." "Olivia Simmons," she offered weakly. "Daniel Evans," he replied with a slight tip of his head, a gesture of habit despite the absence of his hat, which had been claimed by the river. "Most folks around these parts just call me Dan." As the shock began to wear off, Olivia became acutely aware of her soaked clothing clinging to her body. She crossed her arms over her chest, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Daniel noticed her discomfort and quickly shrugged out of his wet vest, offering it to her even though it wouldn't provide much additional coverage. "Paradise is just over that ridge," he said, nodding toward the town in the distance. "My ranch is closer, though. We can get you dried off and find you something warm to wear." "Paradise," Olivia repeated, wondering if she'd heard correctly. Daniel smiled, the simple gesture transforming his weathered face. "Paradise, Nevada territory. Might not look like much, but it's home." "I was meant to meet my uncle there," Olivia explained. "Herbert Simmons, do you know him?" A shadow crossed Daniel's face. "Herb Simmons was your uncle." The past tense wasn't lost on Olivia, whose expression fell immediately. "Was?" Her voice trembled with the question. Daniel helped her to her feet before answering. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, Miss Simmons, but Herbert passed away 2 months ago. Pneumonia took him quickly." The news hit Olivia like a physical blow, and she swayed on her feet. Daniel's strong hand steadied her by the elbows. Her uncle had been her last living relative, and her only hope for a new beginning after the fire that had claimed her parents' Boston home and all their worldly possessions. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Daniel whistled for his horse, which had remained nearby, grazing on the sparse grasses along the riverbank. "Let's get you somewhere warm first. We can figure out the rest after you've had a chance to recover." He helped Olivia onto his horse before mounting behind her. She was acutely aware of his presence, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength in his arms as he reached around her to take the reins. Under different circumstances, such proximity to a stranger would have been scandalous, but tonight it was her lifeline. The Evans Ranch appeared on the horizon as the last rays of sunlight faded into darkness. The modest two-story house stood as a beacon of hope amidst the vast landscape. As they approached, a woman emerged from the front door, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she noticed their soaked appearance. "Martha," Daniel called out as he dismounted and helped Olivia down. "This is Miss Olivia Simmons. She had an accident at the river. She'll need dry clothes and a hot meal." The gray-haired woman nodded without hesitation. "Of course. Come with me, dear." Martha, as Olivia would later learn, was the Evans family housekeeper and had been with them since Daniel was a boy. She led Olivia upstairs to a bedroom with a small adjoining washroom, where a copper tub was quickly filled with heated water. "These belong to Mr. Evans' sister," Martha explained, laying out a simple cotton dress. "She's living in San Francisco now with her husband, but left some things behind. You two seem about the same size." Olivia thanked the woman and sank gratefully into the warm bath, allowing the heat to chase away the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: grief for her uncle, fear for her uncertain future, and overwhelming gratitude toward the man who had risked his life to save hers. Downstairs, Daniel had also changed into dry clothes and was nursing a small glass of whiskey by the fireplace when Olivia descended the stairs. He stood immediately, struck by her transformation. With her dark hair falling in damp waves around her shoulders and her slender figure outlined by the borrowed dress, she possessed an understated beauty that made his breath catch. "Feeling better?" he asked, setting his glass aside. "Much, thank you." Olivia's hand smoothed the unfamiliar fabric of the dress. "And thank you for the clothes. I promise I'll find a way to repay your kindness." Daniel gestured for her to join him by the fire. "No need. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone would have jumped into a raging river fully clothed," she countered, settling into the chair across from him. "You saved my life, Mr. Evans." "Dan," he corrected gently, "and I'm just glad I was riding by when I was." Martha appeared with a tray of food, a bowl of hearty stew, fresh biscuits, and a cup of hot tea. Olivia hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma reached her, and she ate gratefully while Daniel explained the situation to his housekeeper. "Herbert Simmons was her uncle," he concluded. "She's just arrived to find he's passed on." Martha's kind eyes filled with sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear. Herb was a good man. The whole town mourned his passing." "Did he leave any property?" Olivia asked hopefully. "In his letters he mentioned a small house." Daniel exchanged a glance with Martha before answering. "He had a cabin on the edge of town, but I'm afraid it wasn't much to speak of. The bank took possession after his debts were settled." Another door closed, another hope dashed. Olivia set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly diminished despite the delicious food. "I see. You're welcome to stay here until you decide what you want to do," Daniel offered, surprising himself with the invitation. His ranch was his sanctuary, his private domain since returning from the war. Yet something about this woman's quiet dignity in the face of such misfortune touched him deeply. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose," Olivia protested weakly. "It's no imposition," Martha interjected. "This house has been too quiet for too long. Besides, there's plenty of room." Daniel nodded in agreement. "Stay at least until you're recovered from today's ordeal. Paradise isn't the easiest place for a woman alone, but there are opportunities if you know where to look." Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed Olivia, the events of the day catching up with her all at once. Daniel noticed her stifling a yawn and stood up. "We can discuss your options in the morning. For now, get some rest." That night, as Olivia lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the distant howl of coyotes, she found herself thinking about the man who had pulled her from the river. There was a sadness behind his eyes that resonated with her own losses. Perhaps, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, paradise wasn't such an ironic name after all. The following days established a tentative routine. Olivia helped Martha with household chores, insisting on making herself useful while she stayed under their roof. Daniel went about his ranch work, often leaving before dawn and returning tired and dusty in the evenings. During their shared meals, Olivia learned that Daniel had inherited the ranch from his father 5 years ago, after returning from fighting in the Civil War. Like many men who had seen the horrors of battle, he rarely spoke of his experiences, but the nightmares that occasionally echoed through the hallway at night told their own story. A week after her arrival, Daniel found Olivia on the front porch, staring out at the vast landscape painted gold by the setting sun. The same sunset colors that had gleamed upon the water where he'd first seen her. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair beside her. Olivia smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was just thinking about what comes next. I can't stay here forever living off your charity." "It's not charity," Daniel replied firmly, "and there's no rush." She turned to face him, her expression earnest. "I need to find work, a way to support myself. In Boston, I was a teacher's assistant, but I doubt Paradise has much need for education." Daniel considered this information. "Actually, Paradise is growing. Lots of families settling in now that the silver strike has brought prosperity." The town council was just discussing the need for a school teacher last month. Hope sparked in Olivia's eyes. "Truly. I'm heading into town tomorrow to pick up supplies. Why don't you come along? You can speak with Mayor Collins about the position." The prospect of having a purpose again lifted Olivia's spirits considerably. "I'd like that very much." The ride into Paradise the next morning was Olivia's first real glimpse of the town that might become her home. A single main street was lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small bank, and various other establishments catering to the needs of the growing community. People nodded respectfully to Daniel as they passed, curious glances directed at his companion. Mayor Collins, a portly man with an impressive mustache, received them in his modest office above the town's only hotel. His eyes lit up when Daniel explained the purpose of their visit. "A teacher. Well, this is providential timing, Miss Simmons. We've just finished construction on a small schoolhouse, but have had no luck finding someone qualified to run it. I've had experience assisting at a girls' academy in Boston," Olivia explained. "I'm well versed in reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and basic sciences." The mayor looked impressed. "Eastern education, excellent. And you're Herbert Simmons' niece, you say? He was a respected member of our community. His recommendation alone would have carried weight." They discussed the particulars: a modest salary, a small room behind the schoolhouse that would serve as living quarters, and expectations for the curriculum. By the end of the meeting, Olivia had secured the position, with classes to begin in 2 weeks' time, allowing the town to spread word to outlying homesteads. As they left the mayor's office, Olivia could hardly contain her excitement. "I can't believe it. My own schoolhouse." Daniel smiled at her enthusiasm. "The children here could use some proper learning. Most of them can barely write their names." Their next stop was the general store, where Daniel needed to order supplies for the ranch. The storekeeper, a friendly man named Peterson, greeted them warmly. "Dan Evans. Twice in 1 month must be a record," he teased before turning his attention to Olivia. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Olivia Simmons," Daniel replied. "She's just been appointed as Paradise's new school teacher." "Simmons, any relation to old Herb?" "His niece," Olivia confirmed. Peterson's expression softened. "Sorry about your uncle, Miss Simmons. Fine man. Would have been proud to see you taking on teaching our young ones." While Daniel discussed his order with Peterson, Olivia browsed the store's modest selection of goods. Her eyes lingered on a small silver locket, not unlike the one she had lost in the river. It was simple but beautiful, with a delicate floral pattern etched into its surface. "That caught your eye, did it?" Peterson asked, noticing her interest. "Just got that in last week. Fine craftsmanship." Olivia touched it wistfully but moved on. With no money of her own yet, such luxuries were out of reach. As they prepared to leave town, Daniel suddenly remembered something. "We should stop by Widow Chen's place before we go. Best seamstress in 3 counties, you'll need some clothes of your own." Widow Chen's shop was tucked away on a side street. The small Chinese woman greeted them with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Daniel explained the situation, and Widow Chen immediately began taking Olivia's measurements, clucking sympathetically at the borrowed dress. "Too big in shoulders, too long in waist. I make you proper clothes, miss. Working clothes, teaching clothes." Olivia was touched by the woman's kindness, especially when she insisted on having 2 dresses ready within days, despite Olivia's protest that she couldn't pay until she received her first wages. "Mr. Evans, good customer." "I trust his word," Widow Chen said simply, looking between them with knowing eyes that made both Olivia and Daniel slightly uncomfortable. The ride back to the ranch was filled with Olivia's excited chatter about her plans for the school, the books she hoped to acquire, and the subjects she would teach. Daniel listened, finding her enthusiasm contagious. It had been a long time since he'd felt such optimism about anything. "Thank you," she said suddenly, her voice softer, "for everything. If you hadn't pulled me from that river—" "Let's not dwell on what might have been," he replied, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Besides, Paradise is getting a proper school teacher out of it. The town owes you more thanks than you owe me." But Olivia shook her head. "You saved my life, gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go, and helped me find my place here. I won't forget that, Daniel Evans." The way she said his full name sent an unexpected warmth through him. For years after the war, he'd kept to himself, finding comfort in solitude and the predictable rhythms of ranch life. But in just a week, this woman had somehow breached the careful walls he'd built around himself. The following days passed in a blur of preparation. Olivia visited the schoolhouse, a simple 1-room building with rows of rough-hewn benches and a small blackboard. The living quarters behind it were sparse, just a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and a potbelly stove for cooking and heat, but to Olivia, it represented independence. Daniel helped her clean and prepare the space, bringing over extra blankets from the ranch and a small bookshelf he'd crafted in his workshop. Martha contributed curtains for the windows and a colorful quilt for the bed. Even Widow Chen delivered the promised dresses early, along with a surprise nightgown and shawl for cold mornings. The night before Olivia was to move into her new home, Daniel found her on the porch again, gazing at the stars that blanketed the vast Nevada sky. Nervous about tomorrow, he asked, joining her. "A little," she admitted. "It's silly, I know. I've been so eager to start, to have my own place, but now that it's happening." "It's not silly at all," Daniel assured her. "New beginnings are always a little frightening." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of the ranch a soothing backdrop to their thoughts. "I'm going to miss this," Olivia said finally. "Your home has become comfortable." Daniel cleared his throat, suddenly finding it difficult to look at her. "You're always welcome here. Anytime." Before he could second-guess himself, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I got you something. A small token for your new beginning." Surprised, Olivia carefully unwrapped the gift. Inside was the silver locket she had admired at the general store. "Daniel," she breathed, looking up at him with wide eyes. "How did you know?" "I saw you looking at it," he said simply. "I thought maybe it could replace the one you lost. Open it." Inside was a tiny pressed wildflower, a desert primrose. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "They bloom after rain," Daniel explained, his voice low. "Even in the harshest conditions, they find a way to thrive. Reminded me of you." Olivia's fingers trembled slightly as she fastened the locket around her neck. "I'll treasure it always." Their eyes met in the dim light of the porch lantern, and for a moment Daniel thought about closing the distance between them. Instead, he stood abruptly. "It's getting late. Big day tomorrow." Olivia nodded, understanding his retreat even as she felt a twinge of disappointment. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Olivia." The schoolhouse bell rang bright and early on Monday morning, its clear tone carrying across Paradise to summon children from throughout the town and surrounding homesteads. Olivia stood at the door in one of her new dresses, a practical blue cotton with white collar and cuffs, watching nervously as her students arrived. By 9 o'clock, 23 children ranging in age from 6 to 15 were seated in the schoolhouse, eyeing their new teacher with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Olivia took a deep breath and introduced herself, laying out her expectations and plans for their education. The first day was challenging. Some of the older boys tested her authority, particularly Thomas Reid, the 16-year-old son of a local rancher who made it clear he considered school beneath him. The younger children were fidgety and unused to sitting still for lessons. By the end of the day, Olivia was exhausted but determined. As the weeks passed, she fell into a routine. Mornings were devoted to reading and writing, afternoons to arithmetic and history. She organized the children by ability rather than age, allowing each to progress at their own pace. Even Thomas Reid, initially her biggest challenge, began to show interest when she discovered his aptitude for mathematics and gave him more advanced problems to solve. Daniel visited occasionally, usually under the pretense of delivering firewood or checking on the schoolhouse roof. Each time, Olivia's heart would quicken at the sight of him, and she found herself looking forward to these brief encounters more than she cared to admit. Paradise was beginning to feel like home. Olivia became acquainted with the townspeople, joining the ladies' sewing circle that met on Thursday evenings and attending Sunday services at the small church. Mayor Collins praised her work with the children, noting the improved behavior and enthusiasm for learning that many parents had commented on. One crisp October afternoon, as Olivia was dismissing her students for the day, she noticed Daniel waiting outside, seated on his horse with another saddled mount beside him. "Mr. Evans," she greeted him, conscious of the curious glances from her departing pupils. "What brings you here?" "Thought you might like to see more of the territory," he replied, patting the second horse. "Unless you're too tired from teaching," the offer was too tempting to refuse. Within minutes, Olivia had changed into her riding skirt and joined Daniel for a journey into the hills surrounding Paradise. "Where are we going?" she asked as they left the town behind. "There's a place I want to show you. My father used to take me there when I was a boy." They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily into the foothills. The landscape changed from the sparse desert surrounding Paradise to a more varied terrain with juniper trees and rocky outcroppings. Finally, they crested a ridge, and Daniel brought his horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing to the valley below. Olivia gasped. Nestled in the valley was a small lake, its surface gleaming like polished silver in the afternoon sun. Cottonwood trees surrounded it, their leaves turning golden with the approach of autumn. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I had no idea this existed so close to Paradise." "Most folks don't know about it," Daniel replied. "My father discovered it while tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on our cattle. He called it Grace Lake because he said finding water in this desert was nothing short of divine grace." They descended to the lake shore and dismounted. Daniel spread a blanket beneath one of the cottonwoods and produced a simple picnic from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a small flask of sweet cider. As they ate, Daniel opened up about his past in a way he never had before. He spoke of his father, a tough but fair man who had built the ranch from nothing, his mother who had died when he was 12, and his sister Catherine, now married to a banker in San Francisco. "And then the war came," he said, his voice taking on a distant quality. "I was 22, full of ideals and notions of glory. Joined the Union cavalry thinking I'd be home in a few months with stories to tell." Olivia remained silent, sensing his need to speak without interruption. "4 years later, I came back a different man, saw things, did things." He trailed off, staring out at the lake. "My father took one look at me and knew, never asked questions, never pushed, just put me to work on the ranch and let the land heal what it could." "Is that why you live so far from town?" Olivia asked gently. "To find peace?" Daniel nodded. "For a long time, I couldn't bear to be around people. Their noise, their demands, their expectations. But lately—" He turned to look at her, his eyes intense. "Lately, I've been thinking that solitude isn't the answer either." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Olivia felt a flutter in her chest as he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Olivia," he began, his voice rough with emotion. But whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the distant rumble of thunder. They both looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, moving swiftly in their direction. "We should head back," Daniel said, reluctantly pulling away. "These mountain storms can be fierce and the trail gets treacherous when wet." They packed up quickly and mounted their horses. The storm moved faster than anticipated, catching them halfway down the mountain. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the dirt trail into slick mud. Lightning cracked overhead, followed immediately by booming thunder that spooked the horses. Olivia's mount reared suddenly as a bolt struck a nearby tree. She clung desperately to the saddle horn, but the horse bucked wildly, throwing her to the ground. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed awkwardly on the rocky trail. Daniel was at her side instantly, having dismounted with impressive speed. "Are you hurt?" he shouted over the storm's fury. "My ankle," Olivia grimaced, attempting to stand only to fall back with a cry of pain. Without hesitation, Daniel lifted her into his arms and carried her to his more steady mount. "We need to find shelter until this passes," he said, looking around frantically. There's an old line shack not far from here. Can you hold on if I ride behind you?" Olivia nodded, gritting her teeth against the pain. Daniel helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist. Her injured mount had calmed somewhat and followed when Daniel whistled for it. The line shack was little more than a one-room cabin with a leaking roof and dirt floor, but it provided welcome respite from the pounding rain. Daniel helped Olivia inside and gently set her on a rickety cot that was the room's only furniture. "Let me look at that ankle," he said, kneeling beside her. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he removed her boot and examined the swollen joint. "Not broken, I think, but a bad sprain. We'll need to wrap it and keep you off it for a few days." He tore a strip from his own shirt to bind her ankle, his strong hands working with unexpected tenderness. When he finished, he looked up to find Olivia watching him intently, her wet hair framing her face in dark tendrils. "Thank you," she said softly. "Again." Daniel smiled wryly. "Seems I'm destined to rescue you from the elements." "My very own guardian angel," she replied, returning his smile despite her discomfort. He rose and moved to the small fireplace, grateful to find dry kindling and a few logs stored nearby. Soon, a small fire cast warm light throughout the cabin, its crackling presence offering comfort against the storm that continued to rage outside. "We may be here a while," Daniel said, returning to sit beside her on the cot. "The creek between here and town will be flooded by now." Olivia nodded, suddenly aware of their isolation and the impropriety of their situation. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel added, "I'll sleep on the floor." "You'll do no such thing," she protested. "It's cold and damp. There's room enough here for both of us." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Miss Simmons, what would your Boston society say?" "They would be scandalized," she admitted with a small laugh. "But I left Boston behind along with its rigid proprieties. Besides, it's hardly the first time you've saved me from harm." As the evening wore on, they talked by firelight. Olivia told him of her life in Boston, her father's modest success as a furniture maker, her mother's gentle guidance, and the fire that had claimed them both along with their home and business. "The locket that was lost in the river contained miniature portraits of them both," she explained, her fingers absently touching the new locket at her throat. "It was the only thing I managed to save from the fire." "I'm sorry," Daniel said, understanding the depth of her loss. "To lose both parents at once. It changes you," Olivia finished for him. "Makes you realize how quickly everything you thought was permanent can vanish." They fell silent, listening to the rain drumming on the roof and the occasional distant rumble of thunder as the storm slowly moved away. "What made you decide to come west?" Daniel asked finally. Olivia shifted carefully to look at him better, mindful of her injured ankle. "After the fire, there was nothing left for me in Boston. My uncle's letters described paradise as a place of opportunity where a person could start fresh. I suppose I was looking for exactly that paradise. And have you found it?" His question was quiet, almost hesitant. Their eyes met in the firelight, and Olivia felt something shift between them, a recognition of the connection that had been building since the moment he pulled her from the river. "I'm beginning to think I might have," she whispered. Daniel's hand found hers in the dim light, their fingers intertwining. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers in a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a whisper. When he began to withdraw, Olivia's hand moved to the back of his neck, keeping him close as she returned the kiss with greater certainty. Time seemed to stand still as they found in each other what they'd both been missing: connection, understanding, the promise of something deeper than either had dared hope for. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. They slept side by side on the narrow cot, Daniel's arm protectively around Olivia's waist, her head nestled against his shoulder. Outside, the storm passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world waiting to be rediscovered in the morning light. Dawn broke clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. Olivia awoke first, momentarily disoriented before remembering the events of the previous day. Daniel slept peacefully beside her, his features softened in repose. She watched him for a moment, marveling at how quickly this man had become essential to her happiness. When Daniel opened his eyes to find Olivia gazing at him, a slow smile spread across his face. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "How's the ankle?" "Better, I think," she replied, though in truth she had barely given it a thought since waking. He sat up and ran a hand through his tousled hair. "We should head back to town. People will be worried." The return journey was slower than their outbound ride, with Daniel insisting that Olivia ride with him to avoid putting weight on her injured ankle. By the time they reached Paradise, word of their absence had indeed spread concern throughout the small community. Mayor Collins was the first to spot them as they rode down the main street. "Evans, Miss Simmons, we were about to organize a search party." Daniel quickly explained what had happened, emphasizing Olivia's injury and their shelter in the line shack during the storm. If the mayor suspected anything improper, he was tactful enough not to show it. "Well, the important thing is you're both safe," he said. "Miss Peterson substituted at the school this morning, Miss Simmons, so don't worry about your pupils. Dr. Morgan was summoned to examine Olivia's ankle, confirming Daniel's assessment that it was merely sprained. "Stay off it for a few days," he advised, wrapping it properly and providing a pair of crutches. "No permanent damage done." The following week tested Olivia's patience as she was confined mostly to her small quarters behind the schoolhouse. Daniel visited daily, bringing meals prepared by Martha and staying to keep her company in the evenings. The townspeople, rather than gossiping about these visits, seemed to approve of the developing relationship between their new schoolteacher and the rancher who had previously kept so much to himself. By the time Olivia was able to resume teaching, rumors of their courtship had solidified into accepted fact. Children sometimes giggled when Daniel came to walk her home from school, but there was no malice in it, just the simple joy of witnessing a romance unfold in their midst. As autumn deepened into winter, Daniel and Olivia's relationship grew stronger. They rode together on weekends, exploring the countryside around Paradise. He taught her to shoot a rifle just in case, and she introduced him to the poetry of Wordsworth and Keats during quiet evenings by the fire. On Christmas Eve, Paradise held a community celebration in the town hall. Pine boughs decorated the walls, and candles cast a warm glow over the festivities. Olivia wore her best dress, a deep green wool that Widow Chen had made especially for the occasion, with Daniel's silver locket at her throat. After the children performed their Christmas recitations, carefully rehearsed under Olivia's guidance, and the town choir sang carols, Daniel asked for everyone's attention. "Folks," he began, uncharacteristically nervous as he stood before the gathered townspeople. "Most of you know that I've kept to myself since coming back from the war. Never thought I'd find a reason to change that." His eyes found Olivia in the crowd, and his expression softened. "But sometimes life surprises you. Sometimes you're riding along the river at sunset and see someone who needs saving, only to discover that maybe you're the one being rescued." A hush fell over the room as Daniel crossed to where Olivia stood. Taking her hands in his, he continued, "Olivia Simmons came to Paradise looking for a new beginning. What she didn't know was that she was my new beginning too." He dropped to one knee, producing a simple gold ring from his pocket. "Olivia, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Daniel Evans, I will marry you." The town hall erupted in cheers and applause as Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her. In that moment, surrounded by the community that had become their extended family, both felt they had truly found paradise. They were married on a clear spring day in May of 1868, almost a year to the day since Daniel had pulled Olivia from the river. The ceremony took place beside Grace Lake, which was surrounded by wildflowers in full bloom, including the desert primroses that had come to symbolize their love. Olivia wore a cream-colored dress with delicate lace trim, her dark hair adorned with a crown of flowers woven by her female students. Daniel, unaccustomed to formal attire, nonetheless cut a handsome figure in a new black suit, his normally unruly hair tamed for the occasion. The entire population of Paradise turned out for the wedding, traveling in wagons and on horseback to the secluded lake that few had visited before. Mayor Collins performed the ceremony, his usual bombastic manner tempered by the solemnity of the occasion. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada," he proclaimed proudly, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Evans." Daniel needed no further encouragement, drawing Olivia into an embrace that prompted good-natured whoops and hollers from the assembled guests. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Evans, Olivia felt a sense of completeness she had never thought to find again after losing her parents. The celebration continued well into the evening, with tables set up beneath the cottonwood trees laden with food contributed by every household in Paradise. There was dancing to fiddle music, storytelling around campfires as darkness fell, and more than a few emotional toasts to the newlyweds' happiness. As the festivities wound down, Daniel and Olivia slipped away to a small tent that had been set up at a discreet distance from the main gathering. Though they had shared kisses and embraces during their courtship, both had agreed to wait until their wedding night to fully express their love. In the privacy of the tent, lit only by a single lantern, they discovered each other with tender reverence. Daniel's hands, usually so confident in their strength, trembled slightly as he helped Olivia out of her wedding dress. Olivia, for her part, marveled at the scars that marked his body's silent testimonies to the battles he had survived. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion as he took in the sight of her. Olivia blushed but held his gaze steadily. "As are you, my husband." Their coming together was both awkward and perfect, a fumbling, passionate, gentle exploration that culminated in a union more profound than either had imagined possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the blankets, listening to the distant sounds of their wedding guests and the closer rhythm of each other's heartbeats. "I never thought I'd find this," Daniel confessed into the darkness, his fingers tracing patterns on Olivia's bare shoulder. "After the war, I was convinced that part of me was dead, the part that could feel joy, hope, love." Olivia pressed a kiss to his chest, directly over his heart. "And now I know better," he replied, tightening his arm around her. "You brought me back to life, Olivia Evans." The following morning, they returned to the ranch, now their shared home, to begin their life together. Olivia continued teaching, riding to and from town each day on a gentle mare that was Daniel's wedding gift to her. In the evenings, she helped with ranch accounts and correspondence, discovering that her education could contribute to their livelihood in unexpected ways. Daniel, for his part, found that sharing his life and his home eased the lingering shadows of his war experiences. Olivia's presence anchored him to the present, giving him a future to look forward to rather than a past to escape. As summer turned to fall, Olivia began to suspect that their family would soon be growing. When the doctor confirmed her pregnancy in October, she waited until evening to share the news with Daniel, serving his favorite apple pie for dessert with a tiny pair of knitted booties placed beside his plate. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: shock giving way to wonder, then pure, unadulterated joy. He lifted her from her chair and spun her around the kitchen, stopping suddenly as he remembered her condition. "Is this safe? Should you be resting? What does the doctor say?" The questions tumbled out as he gently set her back on her feet, his hands hovering protectively near her still flat stomach. Olivia laughed, covering his hands with her own. "I'm perfectly fine, Daniel. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. The baby won't arrive until spring." News of the coming Evans baby spread quickly through paradise, with Martha appointing herself guardian of Olivia's health and well-being. As Olivia's condition became more apparent, Daniel insisted she reduce her teaching schedule, hiring Miss Peterson as an assistant to take over some of the classes. The winter of 1868-1869 was harsh, with heavy snowfalls isolating the ranch for days at a time. Daniel worked tirelessly to ensure their comfort, bringing in extra firewood and making improvements to the house in preparation for the baby's arrival. He converted a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, crafting a cradle from pine with his own hands. On a blustery day in late March, as the first signs of spring were beginning to emerge from beneath the winter snows, Olivia went into labor. Daniel rode through the melting drifts to fetch both Dr. Morgan and Martha, returning to find Olivia pacing the bedroom, breathing through increasingly intense contractions. The birth was difficult and prolonged. Daniel was banished to the hallway, where he wore a path in the floorboards with his anxious pacing. Each of Olivia's cries tore at his heart, making him feel more helpless than he had since the worst days of the war. After what seemed an eternity, a new cry pierced the air, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Daniel froze, his hand on the doorknob, afraid to hope. Martha opened the door, her usually stern face split with a broad smile. "You have a son, Mr. Evans. A fine, healthy boy." Daniel's legs nearly gave way as he stumbled into the room. Olivia lay propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "Meet your son," she said softly, pulling back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face with a shock of dark hair. Daniel sank to his knees beside the bed, overwhelmed by the surge of love and protectiveness that washed over him at the sight of his child. Tentatively, he reached out to touch the baby's cheek, marveling at the perfection of the miniature features. "He's beautiful," he whispered. "Just like his mother." "What shall we name him?" Olivia asked, though they had discussed possibilities during the long winter evenings. Daniel looked from his son to his wife, the two people who now constituted his entire world. "James," he said decisively, "after my father, James Herbert Evans." Olivia smiled, approving of the tribute to both his father and her uncle. "Welcome to the world, James Herbert Evans. You are very loved." The years that followed brought both joy and challenges to the Evans family. James, called Jamie by his doting parents, grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's intelligence and his father's affinity for the outdoors. By the time he was 3, he was already insisting on helping with ranch chores and accompanying his father on rides around the property. Olivia continued teaching part-time, bringing Jamie with her to school until he was old enough to join the classes as a student. The Paradise Schoolhouse grew along with the town, eventually requiring a second teacher to accommodate the increasing number of children. In the spring of 1873, the Evans family welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Catherine, named for both grandmothers. Unlike her brother's difficult birth, Eliza arrived quickly and with minimal fuss, as if eager to join the family that awaited her. "She has your eyes," Daniel observed as he held his daughter for the first time, "and I suspect she'll have your spirit too." Olivia laughed, watching her husband's large hands cradle their tiny daughter with such gentleness. "Heaven help us all if that's the case." Life settled into a rhythm marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's growth. The ranch prospered under Daniel's management, expanding to include more cattle and employing several hands to help with the increased workload. Olivia's reputation as an educator spread throughout the territory, bringing occasional offers from larger towns that she politely but firmly declined. "Paradise is our home," she would tell Daniel when such offers arrived. "I can't imagine raising our children anywhere else." Daniel would simply nod, unable to express how deeply her words touched him. The ranch that had once been his sanctuary from the world had transformed into the heart of a family, and he wouldn't trade that for all the gold in Nevada. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Olivia with a trip to San Francisco to visit his sister Catherine and her family. It was Olivia's first journey to a major city since leaving Boston, and she delighted in showing Jamie and Eliza the sights and sounds of urban life. "Could we live in a place like this, Pa?" 7-year-old Jamie asked as they watched ships entering the busy harbor. Daniel exchanged a glance with Olivia before answering. "We could, son. There are opportunities in cities that you won't find in paradise. But there are things we have at home that can't be found here either." "Like what?" the boy pressed, always curious. "Space to breathe," Daniel replied thoughtfully. "Room to see the stars at night, the freedom to ride for hours without meeting another soul. A community where everyone knows your name and cares about your welfare." Jamie considered this, his young face serious. "I think I like paradise better," he decided. "Me too," 4-year-old Eliza chimed in, though she had been more interested in chasing seagulls than participating in the conversation. Daniel's arm slipped around Olivia's waist as they watched their children. "Seems we're raising them right," he murmured against her hair. Upon their return to paradise, they found the town in the midst of significant changes. The railroad was coming through, bringing with it promises of increased prosperity and connection to the wider world. Some older residents grumbled about progress ruining their quiet way of life, but most recognized the opportunities the railroad would bring. Daniel was approached by the railroad company about selling a portion of his land for the planned route. The offer was generous enough to secure the family's financial future for generations, but the proposed track would cut directly through the western pastures where some of the best grazing land lay. "What do you think?" he asked Olivia late one night, after they had put the children to bed. "The money would mean we could send Jamie and Eliza east for college if they wanted, maybe even take that trip to Europe you've talked about." Olivia considered carefully before answering. "It's your family's land, Daniel. I know what it means to you." "Our family's land," he corrected gently. "And I'm asking what you think." She sighed, leaning against him on the porch swing that had become their favorite spot for evening conversations. "I think progress is inevitable. Paradise won't stay the same whether we sell the land or not. The question is whether we want to have some control over how that change affects us." After much deliberation, Daniel negotiated a compromise with the railroad company, a modified route that would skirt the edge of his property, rather than bisecting it, along with assurances of a proper station stop in paradise itself. The deal included shares in the railroad company that would provide ongoing income as well as the initial payment for the land. The arrival of the railroad in 1879 transformed Paradise almost overnight. New businesses sprang up near the station, including a hotel, a larger general store, and eventually a small bank. The population doubled within 3 years, bringing new families and new students to Olivia's school. Not all the changes were positive. The saloon grew rowdier with the influx of railroad workers and travelers, occasionally requiring the intervention of the newly appointed town sheriff. Land prices soared, pricing out some of the original settlers who chose to sell and move further west. Through it all, the Evans Ranch remained a haven of stability amid the rapid change. Daniel adapted to the new realities of ranching in an increasingly connected world, while Olivia balanced her teaching duties with her responsibilities as the wife of one of Paradise's most prominent citizens. Their children thrived. Jamie, inheriting his father's affinity for the land and animals, showed every indication of wanting to continue the ranching tradition. Eliza, bright and inquisitive like her mother, devoured books and dreamed of adventures beyond Paradise, though always with the intention of returning home. On the 20th anniversary of the day, Daniel pulled Olivia from the river. They returned to that spot alone. The Colorado still flowed strong and fast, but the banks had changed, reinforced in places to prevent erosion, with a small wooden bridge now spanning a narrow section upstream. "It looks so different," Olivia remarked, standing safely back from the water's edge. "Yet the sound is exactly as I remember it." Daniel's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I remember how terrified I was when I saw you going under. Never moved so fast in my life." She turned in his embrace to face him, her hands coming to rest on his chest. At 49, Daniel's hair had begun to silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but to Olivia, he was as handsome as the day they met. "You know, I've never asked what brought you to the river that evening, if you hadn't been riding by just then." Daniel smiled, the memory clear despite the passage of time. "I'd had a disagreement with the cattle buyer in town, thought a ride might clear my head before heading back to the ranch." "A disagreement saved my life," Olivia marveled, "and gave me everything I hold dear." He kissed her then, with the same tenderness that had marked their first kiss in the lined shack during the storm. "Best decision I ever made, jumping into that river after a stubborn woman who didn't have the sense to stay away from dangerous currents." Olivia laughed, the sound mingling with the rush of the water that had brought them together. "And here I thought it was my charm and intelligence that won you over." "Those too," he conceded with a grin, "though I was fairly captivated before you'd said more than 2 words." They lingered by the river until sunset, reminiscing about the years that had passed and speculating about what the future might hold. As the sky painted itself in the same colors that had witnessed their first meeting, Daniel produced a small package from his pocket. "Another anniversary gift?" Olivia asked, taking the carefully wrapped box. "Open it and see." Inside was a brooch crafted from gold and river stones, a miniature replica of the river where they had met, complete with tiny cottonwoods along the bank. "Daniel, it's exquisite," Olivia breathed, tracing the delicate craftsmanship with her fingertip. "Where did you find this?" "Had it made special by a jeweler in San Francisco," he explained. "Sent him sketches and descriptions. Wanted something that would capture where our story began." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, they made their way back to the horses that would carry them home. 20 years had passed since fate had brought them together on this riverbank. Yet the love that had blossomed from that chance encounter remained as strong as ever. The ride home took them past the schoolhouse, where Olivia had first established herself in Paradise, now expanded into a proper two-room building with a bell tower. Beyond it lay the town that had grown from a small settlement into a thriving community, its streets illuminated by the newfangled electric lights that had been installed the previous year. And finally, the ranch house came into view, no longer just Daniel's retreat, but the heart of their family's life together. Lights glowed in the windows, and as they approached, the front door opened to reveal Jamie and Eliza, now 18 and 15, waiting to hear about their parents' anniversary adventure. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Daniel and Olivia sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nevada sky. The same stars that had witnessed their love story from its dramatic beginning to this moment of quiet contentment. "Do you ever wonder," Olivia asked softly, "what might have happened if you hadn't been riding by the river that day, if our paths had never crossed?" Daniel was silent for a long moment before answering. "I don't like to think about it. Before you, I was existing, not living. You and the children, you're everything to me." Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. "When I came west seeking paradise, I never imagined I would find it in a person rather than a place." His arm tightened around her, pulling her closer against the evening chill. "We found it together, Olivia, and we build it anew each day." As the night deepened around them, they remained on the porch. Two people who had discovered through chance, courage, and choice that sometimes paradise isn't a destination but a journey shared with the right companion. In the years that followed, Paradise continued to grow and change, as did the Evans family. Jamie took increasingly more responsibility for the ranch operations, introducing modern techniques he learned from agricultural journals and occasional visits to more established ranches in California. At 25, he married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, building a smaller house on Evans' land for his new family. Eliza, determined and independent like both her parents, pursued her education at a women's college in the East before returning to Paradise as the town's first female doctor. Her journey wasn't easy. She faced skepticism and resistance from some quarters, but the respect her family had earned over the decades helped smooth her path. Daniel and Olivia watched their children's achievements with pride, finding new purpose in their roles as mentors, advisors, and eventually, grandparents. Jamie's son, Daniel James, called DJ by everyone except his formal grandmother, was born in 1893, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Olivia Rose. Eliza, focused on establishing her medical practice, waited longer to marry, finally finding her match in the town's young newspaper editor when she was 30. As they entered their 60s, Daniel and Olivia gradually stepped back from active roles in the ranch and school, though neither could entirely give up their lifelong passions. Daniel still rode out daily to check on the herds, while Olivia volunteered at the school, now grown to 4 classrooms with separate teachers for different grade levels. In the spring of 1908, 40 years after Daniel had pulled Olivia from the river, they celebrated with a grand anniversary party attended by nearly everyone in Paradise. The town had grown into a proper small city by then, with paved streets, a courthouse, and even a small hospital where Eliza practiced. During the celebration, Mayor Williams, Colin's successor, presented them with a proclamation naming the new town park Evans Common in recognition of their contributions to Paradise. It was a fitting tribute to a couple whose love story had become legendary in local lore, often told to newcomers, as evidence of the special magic that paradise possessed. That summer, Daniel suffered his first heart attack while inspecting fence lines on the far pasture. Jamie found him and brought him home, where Eliza took charge of his medical care. Though he recovered, the episode served as a stark reminder of their mortality. "I'm not ready to lose you," Olivia confessed one night as they lay in bed. Daniel's breathing finally returned to normal after weeks of struggle. He reached for her hand in the darkness, his grip still strong despite his recent illness. "You won't lose me. Even when I'm gone, I'll be waiting for you on the other side of that river." The metaphor wasn't lost on Olivia, who squeezed his hand tightly. "Just don't go swimming ahead without me too soon, Daniel Evans," he chuckled weakly. "Yes, madam, I learned long ago not to cross you." Daniel lived 5 more years, long enough to see his grandson DJ take on management of portions of the ranch, and to witness Eliza's twins, a boy and girl named Thomas and Martha, start school. Though his strength never fully returned after the heart attack, he remained engaged with life, sitting on the porch most days to greet visitors and family members, always with Olivia by his side. In the end, it was a peaceful passing. On a crisp autumn morning in 1913, with the aspens turning gold on the hillsides, Daniel simply didn't wake up. Olivia, sensing the change beside her even before opening her eyes, didn't cry immediately. Instead, she placed a gentle kiss on his still warm forehead. "Thank you for my paradise, my love," she whispered. "Save me a place by the river." Paradise turned out in force for Daniel Evans' funeral, the procession from the church to the cemetery stretching for nearly a mile. Stories were shared, tears were shed, and Olivia stood tall, supported by her children and grandchildren, as the man who had been her heart for 45 years was laid to rest beneath an old cottonwood tree. In the days that followed, Jamie worried his mother would fade away, consumed by grief. But Olivia surprised them all with her resilience. "Your father lived fully every day we had together," she told her children. "He would expect no less of me now." She moved from the main ranch house to the smaller cottage that had originally been built for Jamie and his wife, giving the younger generation the space to take full ownership of the Evans legacy. But she remained an active presence in family life, spending time with her grandchildren, maintaining correspondence with far-flung friends, and continuing her volunteer work at the school. On summer evenings, she could often be found sitting on the cottage porch, Daniel's old spyglass beside her as she watched the sunset paint the western sky. Sometimes, family members would join her in these quiet vigils. Other times, she preferred solitude, communing with memories that remained as vivid as the day they were made. Olivia lived to see the changes that the new century brought: automobiles replacing horses on Paradise's streets, electric lights illuminating homes that had once depended on oil lamps, a world war that took some of the town's young men far from home. Through it all, she remained a steadfast presence, a living link to Paradise's earlier days. In the spring of 1920, at the age of 75, Olivia fell ill with influenza. Though she recovered from the initial infection, her strength never fully returned. As summer approached, she asked Jamie to take her to Grace Lake, the special place Daniel had shown her so many years ago. The journey was made by automobile rather than horseback, with Jamie carefully helping his mother navigate the rough terrain once the road ended. The lake looked much as it had when she first saw it, though the surrounding trees had grown taller and new ones had taken root along the shore. "Your father and I had our first real conversation here," Olivia told Jamie as they sat on a blanket beneath a cottonwood. "He opened his heart to me that day in a way I don't think he had with anyone since returning from the war." Jamie, now a man in his 40s with silver threading his dark hair, listened attentively. Though he had heard many stories of his parents' courtship over the years, he treasured these quiet moments when his mother shared new details. "He was the bravest man I ever knew," Olivia continued, her gaze fixed on the lake's placid surface. "Not just for pulling me from the river or surviving the war, but for daring to love again when he thought that part of himself was dead." "He said the same about you," Jamie replied softly. "That you were brave to start over in a strange place with nothing but hope." Olivia smiled, the expression illuminating her aged face with a hint of the young woman she had once been. "We saved each other, your father and I. That's the secret of a good marriage, mutual rescue, every single day." 3 weeks later, Olivia Evans passed away peacefully in her sleep, a worn copy of Wordsworth's poems open on her bedside table. She was laid to rest beside Daniel beneath the cottonwood tree, their headstones matching in simple elegance. The double funeral plot had been Daniel's idea years earlier. "So we'll always be side by side," he had explained, "just like when I pulled you from the river." In the decades that followed, the Evans family continued to thrive in paradise. The ranch expanded and modernized under Jamie's guidance, and later his son DJ's management. Eliza's medical practice grew into a proper clinic, eventually becoming the foundation for the regional medical center that would bear the Evans name in the next century. The story of Daniel and Olivia Evans became part of Paradise's cultural heritage, retold at historical society meetings and local celebrations. The dramatic river rescue, the schoolteacher who brought education to the frontier community, the rancher who helped shape the town's development, these elements made for a compelling narrative that embodied the pioneering spirit of the West. But those who had known them remembered something more profound: the quiet devotion they had shown each other through decades of partnership, the way they had built not just a family or a legacy, but a shared life rich with purpose and love. On the 100th anniversary of their meeting, the Historical Society erected a bronze plaque near the spot on the river where Daniel had pulled Olivia from the current. The inscription was simple: "Near this place in the spring of 1868, Daniel Evans rescued Olivia Simmons from the Colorado River at sunset." Their love story helped build the community of Paradise and continues to inspire generations of their descendants. May we all find the courage to reach out a helping hand and the wisdom to recognize love when it appears in unexpected moments. Each year, as the desert primroses bloom after the spring rains, members of the Evans family still gather at Grace Lake to celebrate the legacy of Daniel and Olivia. They bring picnics and stories, children and grandchildren, continuing the tradition of finding paradise not in a place, but in the connections forged with those we love. And sometimes, when the sunset paints the western sky in shades of orange and crimson, visitors to the Colorado River report seeing two figures standing on the far bank: a tall man in soaked clothing with his arm protectively around a dark-haired woman in a simple dress, both gazing across the water with expressions of perfect peace, as if they've finally reached the paradise they sought together in life.